there, my name is Kristen, and here on this channel I like to talk about social and cultural issues, usually through the lens of popular culture, popular media, and public figures, but not always. If you're new here, I hope you will subscribe, like this video, throw me a comment, and if you're not new here, welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about spirituality, and more specifically, spirituality in the context of millennials and Generation Z who have maybe left their original religion that they grew up in. This video is going to be pretty Christian-centric because that's the religion I grew up in and it's what I know the most about and it's what I feel comfortable speaking on. So hopefully that sounds interesting to you, and yeah, let's just get started. 1/3 of Generation Z and millennials report having no particular religion. 21% of Generation Z and 15% of millennials identify as either agnostic or atheist. But being agnostic or atheist, or just not associating with any particular religion, doesn't mean that somebody doesn't have any spiritual beliefs or any desire to incorporate spiritual practices into their lives. And I think this is really seen when you look at the breakdowns of what types of people believe in what types of spiritual things. For example, 22% of atheists, 56% of agnostics, and 78% of people who just report having no particular religion believe in one of the following: spiritual energy, astrology, psychics, and reincarnation. So obviously, even people who don't have a religion or who are straight up atheists that don't believe in God can still hold spiritual beliefs and find spiritual practices meaningful. And anecdotally, I've seen this a lot on TikTok. I find myself frequently on the #witchtalk side of the app, or just the general spirituality and astrology areas in TikTok. And what you see a lot there is people promoting more kind of general new agey spiritual beliefs. Things like how to manifest things that you want, or how to attract good energy and get rid of bad energy, or, how the stars and planets might impact our lives, and different ways of approaching life from a spiritual perspective. You see a lot of it on TikTok, which is an app used by millennials and Generation Z primarily. And I think that's evidence that even people who don't have a religion still can practice spiritual things and still have an interest in spiritual things. And I'm one of those people. But for me, and I think for a lot of people who have left a religion, or just maybe not left, but they just don't really associate with their original religion, we've had to do some unlearning of certain beliefs and practices that required us to sort of lose faith a little bit. So people had to stop believing in God, or they had to stop believing in hell, things like that. And when you've done this work to unlearn certain things, it can be hard to place your faith in something else. So if somebody doesn't believe in God, why should they believe that the planets impact them, or any other kind of new age belief? And that's something that I run into. Even though I think astrology is interesting, I think, what I read about witchcraft is interesting, I don't necessarily believe in that kind of stuff. I think it's cool, but it's hard for me to put my faith in it because I've already had to teach myself to stop putting faith in things that I don't necessarily believe in. And I think a lot of people who fall into the kind of skeptic category run into this, where we want to have a spiritual practice and spiritual beliefs, but we literally can't make ourselves believe things, and then certain spiritual practices feel kind of empty and hollow and fake because of that. And so this video is going to be just talking about how spirituality can look after you've left a religion. And I think I've already said this, it's going to be pretty Christian focused, but I really just want to dig into what can someone's spiritual life look like after they've left a religion, and how can you approach building your spiritual practice if you've left your religion. I hope that this sounds interesting to you, and if it does, we'll just keep on moving. The first thing we need to talk about when approaching this subject is, why do people leave religions, and more specifically in this video, Christianity, in the first place? I did some research and found some general themes. Obviously, everybody's different. Everybody's going to have different reasons for why they are no longer associated with Christianity, but these are the general trends that I see reported. The big one is, how can an all-loving God create a world with so much suffering? And when you add in that the God is supposed to be all-powerful and all-knowing, it makes it even more questionable. Another problem people tend to bring up is some perceived hypocrisy among Christians. Very often, people who self-describe as Christians also behave quite hatefully towards certain groups, like LGBT people. Some other problems people have with Christianity is that a literal or historical reading of the Bible is contradicted by what we know to be true from science. Other people say, they don't believe in fairy tales, and they consider the Bible to be full of fairy tales. And so those are some of the reasons why Christianity doesn't really work for certain people. I missed one. One other reason is there's been a lot of injustice committed in the name of Christianity, and that's a problem for a lot of people. So now that we've discussed the reasons why somebody might have left Christianity, we should talk about what you might be looking for in a spiritual practice after having left Christianity. And what you're looking for is going to be, in many cases, kind of based off of why you left, because you're going to want something that doesn't have the same problems as the faith that you are no longer associated with. So somebody who's left Christianity for the reasons I described might be looking for a faith that does not perpetuate any kind of discriminatory beliefs or practices. You might be looking for a faith that doesn't ask you to believe in something that you find unbelievable. You might be looking for something that provides meaning and gives you a framework from which to approach your life. And you probably would be wanting a faith that allows for interpretation, that doesn't necessarily threaten you with hell if you don't believe everything that they espouse down to the letter. And so the question becomes, what's going to check all those boxes for people? What's going to be something that people can actually believe in, that means something to them, that also doesn't carry with it the baggage of the religion that they used to hold? I certainly can't speak for everybody, but for me, the biggest problem in looking for spiritual practices that I can incorporate into my life is that I need something that has meaning for me and that I find that resonates deep within me. And when it comes to things like astrology, tarot, crystals, any kind of new agey spiritual beliefs, those beliefs are cool. I find them interesting, and I think that they are generally positive in many ways, but they don't hold a deep meaning to me. They don't necessarily move me the way that certain religious events used to be able to move me. And I think a lot of that is to do with the fact that I didn't grow up in a culture that practiced those things. I grew up in a culture that practiced Christianity. And so it's really Christian symbols, Christian language, Christian stories that hold that meaning for me in ways that things like astrology never will. I can read about what the planets mean and what they're supposed to do, but that doesn't give it meaning deep in my soul and my unconscious mind, if that makes sense. And I think that that's a problem that a lot of skeptics face as they are realizing that they would like to have some spirituality, but struggling to actually build a spiritual practice. One way to open up more spiritual practices to you is to let go of the need for things to be literally true. If you grew up Christian, especially if you grew up evangelical, you were probably taught that the Bible is literal historical fact. And this mindset kind of can go with you even after you stop believing that the Bible is true, because then you move into other faiths, other spiritual practices, and you want the things that are being talked about there to also be literally true like you were taught growing up. And I think that can get in the way of things, because something I've learned as I've gotten older is that the language of spirituality and religion is often a lot more useful when you read it on a metaphorical level and you interpret it as something that is conveying deeper truths that aren't literally true on the surface level. Once you internalize that and can learn to appreciate the metaphorical language and the deeper meanings being conveyed by various religious myths and spiritual stories, you can look for that deeper meaning and take that deeper meaning and apply it without feeling fake or hollow because you don't believe it's literally true. So for me, this comes into play with things like astrology. Do I literally believe that different planets control different things and that the time and date of your birth is going to determine a million different things about you? Not really, no. However, I do find looking at the planets, looking at the stars, seeing what's going on in the universe, and just looking at what those things mean within astrology to give me a useful framework from which to approach life and thinking. It doesn't hurt me to introspect about a certain aspect of my life because of what the planets are doing on a specific day. It's just a tool to promote thinking and to promote growth. And I think the same thing can be applied for other spiritual beliefs. So I already mentioned astrology. Even though I say that I find astrology to be a useful framework, for me, I think this goes back to the fact that the things in astrology don't hold deeper meaning for me from like a cultural context, like in my unconscious mind. The astrological things don't actually mean anything. I still can only go so deep with astrology. Even if I accept that it is metaphorical and it is really more just a framework, it doesn't hold that deep meaning. It doesn't resonate in my soul the way I want my religious practice to. And so I think astrology is cool. I read about it, but it doesn't fill that need for something spiritual that I have. And that's where this next thing that I'm going to talk about comes up. So I came across somebody on YouTube and she was talking about spells and the reasons why they work and reasons why they might not work. And I will put a clip of what she said in the video, possibly. I reached out to her to see if that would be okay. If she doesn't get back to me, though, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to put anybody's name up on the screen that doesn't want me to put their name on the screen, if that makes sense. So if she doesn't get back to me, I'm just going to explain it. And basically what she said was, for a spell to work, it needs to incorporate symbols and rituals that actually have meaning to you. It's not enough for you to read that a cup symbolizes receptivity. Because if for you a cup means something else or it means literally nothing, when you do a spell that involves a cup, it's not going to mean anything to you. And the whole point of spells and spiritual practices in general are to communicate with your unconscious mind. And so if you're not using something that has meaning to you at a deep unconscious level, it might not be doing the trick for you. It might not be scratching that itch. And I think that's why astrology hasn't really filled that void for me. And I think that's why I've not really found any other spiritual practice or religion that can fill that void that was left when I stopped believing in my evangelical Christian faith. Because none of the things I tried were rooted in Christian symbolism, imagery, language, metaphor, etc. So it didn't have that deeper meaning that really connected with my soul. So once these two concepts clicked for me, the first one being that religion doesn't have to be literal, it can just be a framework for thinking about life, it can just be metaphorical. And then two, that for something to resonate deeply with you, it does need to be rooted in something meaningful for you. That helped me to realize what exactly I was missing in my spiritual life, and that was a Christian-based spirituality. I grew up Christian, I am culturally Christian, and when I'm looking for a spiritual practice, for me, I found what has the most meaning are practices that are rooted in Christianity, because that's what resonates deeply with me and my soul, and that's what communicates with my unconscious mind in ways that astrology, I keep mentioning astrology, but witchcraft, anything like that. Those things can't connect deeply in my mind the way things based in Christianity can. And since I've come to the understanding that it doesn't have to be literal, I don't have to take the Bible literally, I can read it metaphorically, that's made things a lot simpler for me. And so I want to talk about my faith, my kind of Christian spiritual practices and beliefs a little bit. And if that's interesting to you, please stick around. If it's not, thank you for watching to this point. And, before I go on to talk about my faith, I just want to ask you, what's your spiritual practice? How do you approach faith, especially if you've left your religion, if you've left Christianity or another religion? How do you still incorporate spirituality into your life? Alrighty, so let's get on to talking about my spirituality. So let's talk about my spiritual beliefs and my, Christian spirituality. The biggest influence for me on my beliefs and my spirituality has been Father Richard Rohr. He is a Franciscan monk, so he's Catholic, and his teachings really resonate with me. They are obviously using the language of Christianity and the stories of the Bible, but he has a very different approach from the teachings that I grew up in, which were evangelical Christian teachings. The biggest thing that I take from Richard Rohr's teachings is the concept of the universal Christ. So I'm going to talk about what that means and what that is. To introduce the concept, first I want to talk about another thing. So something that Richard Rohr says a lot, and that he quotes other saints as having talked about too, is that every living creature is a book about God. You can look at the earth, look at a living being on earth, and everything you need to know about God, you can learn from looking at living creatures. And so what that really means is that every creation of God's is a manifestation of God. It tells you something about God. Every creature has their own energies, their own way of being that teaches you something else about God. And you can learn a lot about God from just looking at his creation, or her creation, or their creation. God doesn't necessarily have a gender, but I am used to saying he, so I might say that again. And something else that Richard Rohr teaches and talks about a lot is that we know the universe has existed for millennia. Billions and billions of years the universe has existed for, and the earth has existed for billions of years too. And so the question becomes why do people think that God only started talking to us when the writings of the Bible were put out? Do people really think that God was just silent up until then? No, that's absurd and very self-centered to think that, the only things God has ever had to say were about humans and to humans and for humans in the last few thousand years, when we know that the earth and the universe have existed for billions of years. And so what Richard Rohr teaches, and what I think is super cool to think about, is that Christ, which comes from the word Christos, meaning the anointed one, is not Jesus' last name. He's not Jesus' first name, Christ last name. Christ is a concept that represents things being divine or anointed. And what Richard Rohr teaches is that the first coming of Christ was actually with the Big Bang. When matter came into being was when God took physical form. And that was the first coming of Christ. Jesus Christ was actually the second coming. God showing us how God can exist in human form and kind of giving us an example for how to embody Christ in our own lives by showing us Jesus Christ. Now, I believe Richard Rohr does believe in a literal Jesus who walked this earth and was crucified. Personally, I'm not sure if Jesus ever literally existed, but I don't think that that's super important. I think what's more important is what Jesus taught and what Jesus shows us about how we can embody Christ or God in ourselves, in our daily lives. And I think that's really beautiful to imagine that basically, literally, every piece of matter is literally God. We all have a piece of Christ in us. We are all part of a greater collective, which is the universal Christ. I think that's really beautiful, and I think it fits really perfectly in with science. Unlike a literal interpretation of the Bible, which I ultimately had to reject because it didn't hold up to scrutiny, in my opinion. And so I really like this concept of the universal Christ. I like looking for Christ in all things, and I like remembering that I'm part of a collective whole. And so that's become an important part of my spiritual beliefs. I encourage you to look up Richard Rohr. He's really great. I just like listening to him talk, honestly. He has a podcast, and he runs something called the Center for Action and Contemplation, and they have a YouTube channel where they put out videos of his teachings and meditations and stuff like that. So if you're interested, definitely check him out. And let me know what you think. Did the talking about the universal Christ sound just like gobbledygook? Did it resonate with you? I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. Yeah. Thank you so much if you watched this video, especially if you got this far. I hope you will subscribe, like the video, comment on it, let me know what you think. If you want to hear more spiritual stuff, I might make more videos like this. This one was fun to write and make. So yeah, let me know. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye!